In the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles, where the days passed with a gentle hum of normalcy, the Walker family appeared to be the perfect picture of happiness. On the outside, they had everything: a beautiful home, two healthy children, and a stable life. Orion Walker, the husband and father, was a hard-working man who had built a comfortable life for his family through years of dedication as an engineer. He was respected by his colleagues and loved by his children. But, as with many seemingly perfect families, the cracks that formed were hidden beneath the surface. For years, his wife, Marigold Fairfax, had played the role of the ideal wife. She was known in their community for her elegance and beauty, a woman who turned heads wherever she went. But Marigold's life was not as glamorous as it seemed. For years, she had struggled with a growing emptiness. Despite Orion's love for her and his attempts to keep their family together, Marigold felt trapped in a life that no longer brought her joy. The days felt repetitive, and the passion that once defined their early years together had long faded. It wasn't always like this for Marigold. There was a time when she had been deeply in love with Orion. Their courtship had been a whirlwind romance, filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and a shared vision for the future. They had met at a local festival in 1990, both drawn to each other by an instant connection. Orion, with his steady confidence and dependable nature, had given Marigold the sense of security she craved after a tumultuous childhood. Together, they built a life. They married in 1991 in a simple yet intimate ceremony, surrounded by close family and friends. Their two children came not long after. First a girl, and then a boy. Marigold took to motherhood with grace, devoting herself to her family and projecting an image of the perfect wife and mother. In the eyes of her neighbors and friends, Marigold had it all. But after a few years, that image began to crack. The excitement of their early years together had faded into routine. Orion, ever the diligent worker, poured more and more of himself into his job. While he had always made time for his family, the pressures of his career began to pull him away. He worked late hours, often returning home exhausted, and the easy intimacy they once shared had become strained. Marigold, once the vibrant and charming woman who had captured Orion's heart, now found herself feeling increasingly invisible. She felt suffocated by the monotony of her suburban life, the daily routines that left little room for spontaneity or passion. Slowly, a void grew inside her, a void that Orion, no matter how hard he worked, could not fill. Enter Caspian Whitaker, a man who would change everything. Caspian was everything Orion wasn't. Rich, powerful, and irresistibly charming. He had an air of confidence about him that Marigold had never experienced with her husband. They met by chance at a charity event in downtown Los Angeles, where Marigold had been invited by a friend. Caspian, who was a well-known figure in high society, immediately noticed Marigold's beauty and grace. Their first conversation was innocent enough, a simple exchange about the event, the food, and the weather. But from that moment, a dangerous attraction was sparked. Caspian was intrigued by Marigold's elegance, and she, in turn, was captivated by his effortless charm. What began as fleeting social interactions quickly grew into something deeper. Caspian pursued Marigold in a way that made her feel alive again. He showered her with attention, complimented her beauty, and made her feel special in ways Orion hadn't in years. Their relationship began as casual conversations over coffee, then evolved into secret lunches, and soon enough, passionate rendezvous. For Marigold, being with Caspian was intoxicating. He opened doors to a life she had only dreamed of, a world of luxury, expensive dinners, and high-class parties. But more than that, Caspian made her feel like the woman she had always wanted to be: desired, admired, and free. The more time she spent with him, the more distant she became from her family, especially Orion. The affair escalated quickly. Marigold and Caspian couldn't get enough of each other. What began as innocent flirtations soon spiraled into a full-blown relationship. They would meet whenever they could, during Orion's long work hours, in the afternoon when the children were at school, and sometimes even in the evening when Marigold pretended to run errands. With Caspian, Marigold felt like a different person. She wasn't the tired, overworked housewife anymore. She was the center of attention, adored by a man who seemed to worship her. Caspian lavished her with expensive gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, and everything she had once dreamed of. Every time they were together, Marigold felt herself slipping further and further away from the woman she used to be. But with every stolen moment came guilt. Though her marriage to Orion had become strained, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was betraying the man who had given her everything. Orion loved her. Of that she was certain. He worked hard to provide for their family and had never once strayed. But Marigold couldn't stop. The thrill of the affair, the excitement of sneaking around, the intoxicating pull of Caspian's attention, it was all too much to resist. Soon, their affair was no longer just about lust. Marigold began to see a future with Caspian, a life away from Orion and the burdens of her family. Caspian, ever the master manipulator, encouraged these thoughts. He planted ideas in Marigold's mind. What if they could be together without the constraints of her marriage? What if they didn't have to hide anymore? What if Orion was no longer in the picture? Marigold began to fantasize about a life without Orion. The more she indulged in these thoughts, the more appealing they became. She imagined a life of luxury with Caspian, free from the responsibilities of being a wife and mother. But there was one obstacle standing in the way: Orion. At first, the idea of getting rid of Orion seemed unthinkable. After all, he was the father of her children, the man she had once loved deeply. But as her relationship with Caspian intensified, Marigold's desperation grew. Caspian, sensing her vulnerability, began to suggest that they could have it all, if only Orion were out of the way. The plan began to take shape slowly. Caspian assured Marigold that they could make it look like an accident, or better yet, a robbery gone wrong. With his wealth and influence, they could stage the perfect crime and live the life they had always dreamed of. Marigold, caught between guilt and desire, initially hesitated. But the more time she spent with Caspian, the more convinced she became that this was the only way. She couldn't go back to her old life. She couldn't return to being the woman trapped in a loveless marriage, tethered to a life that no longer fulfilled her. And so, Marigold made the fateful decision. Together with Caspian, she began to plot her husband's murder. They would wait until the perfect moment, ensuring that no one would suspect them. It would be clean, swift, and afterward, they could live happily ever after. March 15th, 1996. The day that would change everything. Orion had spent the day at work, focused on a major project that would secure his family's financial future. He had no idea that at home, his wife was preparing to end his life. That evening, Orion returned home as usual. He kissed Marigold on the cheek, greeted their children, and sat down for dinner. For Marigold, the night felt surreal. As she watched Orion interact with their children, a part of her questioned what she was about to do. Could she really go through with it? Could she really take the life of the man who had given her everything? But Caspian's words echoed in her mind. This is the only way. Later that night, after putting the children to bed, Marigold and Orion retired to their room. Orion, exhausted from the day, fell asleep almost immediately. Marigold lay awake, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock and the gentle hum of the night outside. At 2 a.m., Marigold slipped out of bed. She quietly retrieved the knife she had hidden earlier in the day. The cold,